We have to make this crime type too risky and lower the reward. We need to seize all those assets that they gather from their criminal enterprise. And we've seen that with the Chinese authorities and also with some others. But it's something personally I'm very committed to.
Welcome to another episode of Rewilding the World. I'm Ben Goldsmith, and I'm very lucky to have with me Olivia Swaak-Goldman from an amazing organisation named the Wildlife Justice Commission. Olivia, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today.
Well, thank you, Ben, for inviting me onto your wonderful podcast.
So the purpose of this conversation really is to talk about one of the scariest and darkest industries in the world, especially for us nature and wildlife lovers, and that's the trade in trafficked wild species. We know about rhino horns and elephant tusks and pangolins, of course, the most trafficked animal in the world. And it's an enormous trade. I mean, it's not far behind human trafficking, drug trafficking, and so on. And yet, it seems to be left by world governments to little organizations like yours to tackle this problem, which is mind-boggling to me when you think how much money the US alone spends on the Drug Enforcement Agency trying to curtail the trade in drugs, or the penalties that the Chinese government apply to criminals convicted of trafficking in drugs. I think there's life imprisonment or worse, and yet wildlife crime seems to slip under the radar or slip their attention. That's really what I want to drill into. And I'd love to start, Olivia, if possible, with your most recent success story, the Nigerian pangolin trafficking kingpin I saw in the newspapers last week that was busted directly as a result of your work. So perhaps you could tell us that story.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for pointing out the incredible discrepancy between how we address other forms of organized crime and how we address transnational organized criminal groups that are devastating our biodiversity for profit. And we've been able together, for example, with the Nigerian authorities, to show what can happen if you actually address it like organized crime, because that's what it is. These are organized criminal groups that are trafficking in endangered species and pushing them to the brink of extinction because the risk is low and the profits are high. And if this were drugs, there would be a whole different approach. So basically what we try and do at the Wildlife Justice Commission is apply the same tools and techniques that governments apply to address serious organized crime, whether it's drugs or human trafficking or weapons trafficking, and apply that to the trafficking of endangered species because it's the same type of networks that are operating in it. So our work with Nigeria is a great example because everybody knows, like, Nigeria had a terrible reputation of a lot of corruption. A lot of trafficking of pangolin scales went through Nigeria. It was a major hub. I mean, in 2019, you had tons and tons and tons being shipped from Africa through Nigeria to Asia. And we started working with the Nigerian Customs Service several years ago, and we worked with them to do intelligence-led investigations. So to go through and figure out who the key individuals are, to do financial investigations, and to see who was benefiting the most. And to get not only the locals, that's not going to solve the problem. You need to get those people that are organizing this criminal activity. So we went and helped the Nigerian Customs Service to get alleged kingpins from Vietnam, from China, and get them arrested and prosecuted in Nigeria for the trafficking of pangolin scales.
So just for the benefit of those who don't know what a pangolin is, it's an extraordinary, seemingly ancient mammal that looks a little bit like a reptile with hard, scaly shell on its outer body, and it curls into a little ball, a bit like a hedgehog when it wants to defend itself. And they're the most adorable little creatures who have this extraordinary defense mechanism, and they are heavily trafficked. What for? Why do people want these scales? Is it medicinal?
The scales are used in traditional Chinese medicine, and the meat's eaten primarily in Africa. The medicinal scales part is used primarily in Asia, and it's been hugely trafficked in order to meet this demand. And what we're trying to do is to change the risk-reward dynamic. But also we've seen just recently the Chinese authorities said they would no longer include pangolin scales in their traditional Chinese medicine kind of the book that describes what's the best traditional Chinese medicine. So this is a huge result, a huge change. So it's a combination of making it really hard to engage in this trafficking and then bringing back the demand side through things like this legislative change and policy change. And together you can really stop the destruction of these species.
And pangolin trafficking has been catastrophic. I mean, overwhelmingly the major force driving this species to extinction. How many networks or gangs would be responsible primarily for the global trade in pangolins? You know, you read about kind of the cocaine industry, and it's a surprisingly small number of gangs are responsible for the production and the transportation of cocaine, say from South America to North America or South America to Europe. And you have these kind of kingpins, but they're relatively limited in number. So in the case of something like pangolins, this isn't a mom and pup trade, right? It's not people catching a few pangolins and selling them into a local market of some sort. It's controlled from the center. How does that work? And I guess what I'm getting at is how important for the pangolin trade is it when you bust one of these networks and get these kingpins into jail?
It is incredibly important for the pangolin to bust these kingpins, and more importantly than the individual, it's to disrupt and dismantle the networks. And we've been, thanks to the cooperation of the Nigerian Customs Service with the Wildlife Justice Commission, incredibly effective in that. And we've immediately seen the change. So whereas in 2019, you had tons of pangolin scales being shipped from Africa to Asia, we haven't seen a single major seizure of pangolin scales in Asia, in an airport or seaport, in more than 3 years, and even longer for an airport. So we've just seen the trafficking going way down, which means, I mean, there's still a lot of questions about that, but we're seeing that there is much less trafficking, therefore giving time for the pangolin to regroup and to build up their populations again. So we're not talking about indeed an individual coming up upon a pangolin and grabbing it and selling it. We're talking about serious and organized crime dealing in tons and tons and tons of these pangolin scales.
And of course, busting these networks and putting them out of business and causing a major hiccup in the global trade not only buys time for pangolin populations to recover, but it also buys time for those societies in which pangolin scales are being consumed to deal with tackling demand. And we've seen collapsing demand, for example, for ivory in China, major celebrities and brought together by groups like Wild Aid, Peter Knight, who I'd love to get on this podcast sometime, campaigning locally to make it unfashionable and unsexy to use ivory to make stuff or trinkets for your home, for example. And so the ultimate goal has to be to buy enough time that we can kill demand for this stuff and pull the rug out of the market that way. Would you describe Wildlife Justice Commission, therefore, as kind of like a private investigation company working on a not-for-profit basis to scrutinize, investigate, expose, and to bring about convictions of these networks? Is that really what you do? Can you tell me the Wildlife Justice Commission story?
Yeah. So the Wildlife Justice Commission was created thanks to philanthropy in 2015. The Dutch postcode lottery funded something called a Dream Fund, a whole big project, and we were this tiny little part of it. They said, let's see if this will work. Let's create an accountability mechanism for wildlife crime. Even just the terrestrial wildlife crime is the fourth largest transnational organized crime, let alone if you add in marine and timber products. It's devastating biodiversity, driving species to extinction. We're here in the Netherlands, and we have all these courts and tribunals dealing with massive crimes, but nobody's addressing this massive criminal enterprise, and yet the consequences are so large. So let's create this accountability mechanism, and that's going to do two things. One, it's going to investigate the trafficking networks, going for the kingpins and the top level people. There's been so much work done on the poacher level and the fisherman level and the local, person cutting the wood. And that wasn't making the difference that we wanted to see. And what's really important to keep in mind is if the trafficking level had continued at the level it was in 2019, for example, the rhino and the elephant would be extinct. Right? In 2015, it was even worse. We were in the midst of this poaching crisis. So they set up the organization, the Wildlife Justice Commission, to be this kind of accountability mechanism. So we go in and we investigate the criminal networks, the top level criminals, together with local authorities. And which local authority it is, it depends. In Nigeria, as I mentioned, we work very closely with the Nigeria Customs Service. But in Mozambique, while we work with the environmental agency, ANAC, we also work very closely with the organized crime police, CERNIC. And in the United States, we work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And in Malaysia, we work with the Anti-Corruption Commission. So we really work with locals and investigate the top-level criminals. We build compelling case files, meaning we build up evidence level. So it's not media level, right? It's evidence that we can take to court. And we have a 100% conviction rate so far with our cases that have been finalized at court because we do whatever we can do to work with the local authorities to make the strongest cases and to ensure that those top-level criminals are arrested and that we continue to disrupt and dismantle those networks so that eventually the criminals no longer want to do this criminal enterprise.
Because they've been used to doing it for so long without scrutiny, and suddenly it got a whole lot harder because of the work done by Wildlife Justice Commission. But what happens if you do all this work and you pull back the curtain and you find on the side of the kingpins judiciary, judges, police chiefs, politicians? What happens then? How can you bring about? 100% conviction rate is unbelievable. How do you manage to achieve that when we hear so often that the wildlife trade has got some of these influential establishment people in its pocket?
That's a great question. And that, I think, is part of our unique ability. We are incredibly flexible and nimble. So we go where the criminals go. We can move around almost at the speed of light. We have teams all over the world. So when we come across corrupt officials, we can take these cases outside of that jurisdiction. So if there's a corrupt official who's blocking it, we collect the evidence because there's huge amounts of corruption in wildlife crime. And we can go to another jurisdiction and allow that individual to be prosecuted there. So we work with jurisdictions all around the globe as long as there's a legal basis to arrest and convict that person in a new jurisdiction. And because we're so flexible, we're able to do that.
Have you ever made use of this mechanism I only learned about recently, which is that if a trade is carried out in the US dollar, if that's the currency that's used, then immediately the US judiciary can get involved?
Yeah, so if there's a link to the United States, it can take enforcement action. And the U.S. is really strong in this. It's called the Lacey Act. And it's a really impressive piece of legislation in terms of allowing the United States to go after those traffickers worldwide, as long as what they're doing is illegal in their own country, where the endangered species is being taken from, and that there's a link to the United States. And we've used it quite a number of times, including in the case of Tiu Boon-Ching, for example, who was a major kingpin in the transportation of wildlife product from Africa to Asia. The U.S. authorities were able to extradite him to the United States from where he was in Thailand and get him convicted in the Southern District of New York because of a link to the United States.
So are we overwhelmingly talking here about wildlife in Africa, overwhelmingly being the target, the rhinos, the elephants, the stuff we read about anyway, pangolins, being the target of this industry, and then the ultimate destination being Asia, and principally for Asian medicine, Chinese medicine? Or is this more of a global thing? Is wildlife being trafficked from other parts of the world to the same degree, or is it pretty much about Africa and product going to Asia? This episode of Rewilding the World is very kindly brought to you by Uni, that's UNI, the world's first nature-friendly line of luxury body care. We've all heard about the harm that sun cream does to coral reefs, but it's not just sun cream and it's not just coral reefs. Well, Uni makes plastic-free, nature-friendly essentials like shampoo, conditioner, hand wash, and even natural deodorant, all full of nourishing ingredients such as seaweed kelp, aloe vera, and olive oil. We've been loving our Uni products, but don't take it from me. Here's my wife, Jemima.
Yes, I really love them. They're such clean and nourishing products. The microalgae body oil is so good and really smells amazing.
You can find Uni products at Space NK or at weareuni.com.
This is a global issue, and it's so important that we recognize this. It's not just an Africa wildlife to Asia. It's absolutely global. We have sharks in the Eastern Tropical Pacific being killed by the 100 million per year of sharks we're losing. And part of that is for the shark fin soup trade. We're birds coming out of Thailand. We have a lot of the live pet trade. So trafficking in endangered species from, for example, orangutans from Indonesia or lemurs from Madagascar. And those are going all over the world. Reptiles that are desired in Europe. Glass eels from the Mediterranean. So it is a truly global crime type with millions of species being exploited and being driven to extinction.
So where are you most active? I mean, you're one organization. What's the scale of Wildlife Justice Commission? How are you? And you need to be the size of the Drug Enforcement Agency, which has got, a multi-billion-dollar budget and an enormous headcount. Like, is there just you? Are there other organizations working on this in the same kind of way? And what's the scale of your ability to tackle this issue?
We are a small organization based in The Hague, but with offices in several other spots and with teams based all over the world. And I think what makes us a little bit different and effective is our agility and our nimbleness. Because we follow the networks, we're able to have a much more outsized impact than we would if we were, trying to have offices everywhere that we work, because crime displaces. And that's the interesting part. If you tackle it in one place, you have to keep the pressure on it. But the criminals will say, okay, it's too hot wherever in that location, whether it's Nigeria or in Mozambique, and they'll go somewhere else. So you need to be able to go there too. And we're a small organization, and to be honest, I'm always amazed at the impact that we can have as such a small organization. But it's because of our skill set, I think. We have all kinds of individuals that have worked on transnational organized crime for national authorities, and whether that's from Australia or the UK or Canada or South Africa. And we bring that skill set, and also, prosecutors from all over the world. I used to work for the International Criminal Court doing work for the prosecutor, and we bring that kind of skill set, and that allows us to be really focused and efficient in what we do. And because we're not going for the low-level poachers, that has to be done as well. But there are great organizations already doing that. And we fill a gap that hadn't been filled before. And that is to go after the kingpins, to disrupt and dismantle the networks. And it allows us to really focus on those key individuals so that we can have an outsized impact for the effort, because we're dealing with the top level criminals.
Given the nature of the people that you're targeting, Olivia, do you worry about the personal safety of your team and of yourself?
I worry about the personal safety of my team. More than for myself. They're on the front line. But we do everything possible to protect our team members. As I mentioned, our team members are really skilled and have masses of years of experience. So they know how to run transnational organized crime investigations. And we use the same sort of techniques to make sure we're protecting team members as much as possible, and working with local authorities and really ensuring that that every step we can take to protect the team we are taking. And everybody is incredibly motivated. This is a wonderful place to work because everybody's deeply committed. We see the results every day of what we're doing, and we are so lucky to be able to be doing that and to be having this impact on, protecting our species for our kids and our grandkids. And there's no reason we have to lose these species. It's to organized crime. We can stop this. And I think everybody feels that.
I mean, it's real Erin Brockovich stuff for someone like me listening to this story. But it just feels so wrong to me that these kingpins and all those that sit beneath them in the pyramid, that they don't fear governments so much as they fear a little nimble NGO sitting in The Hague halfway across the world. It's extraordinary to me that you're doing this job and that you're having the impact you have. How important are other NGOs? I mean, for example, Sea Shepherd. It's another organization that's doing the work that governments should be doing, documenting abuses of both labor and wildlife at sea. Now, they got 4 boats and they're following around these industrial trawlers that are hoovering up the krill on which whales depend in the Southern Ocean. That data presumably is valuable to you, the data produced by some of these other cutting-edge organizations that are out there at the coalface, like Sea Shepherd.
Absolutely. There's so many great organizations, and we're really lucky to have partnerships with many of them to share information, for one, So we get a better sense. I mean, we're not everywhere. We're in a few spots, and other organizations are as well. And also on a policy level, to make sure that we're being as effective as we can be, and on an advocacy level. So, for example, there is the UN Anti-Corruption Convention, and there is a group of NGOs that work on anti-corruption elements related to this convention. Several years ago, I said, wait, there's organizations working on environmental crime and also on corruption, but they're not talking to each other. So we, together with the UNCAC Coalition, established a working group on environmental crime and corruption. And now we have more than 200 NGOs together talking about these issues and aligning and making sure that we're as effective as we can be to get governments to pay attention to this issue. It's exactly what you said. Like, we need governments to be doing this. And we work really closely with the governments also. So we're not just coming in and doing our thing and leaving, right? We have team members all over the world, including in country, based from the local communities. And we're also working on building up the skill set and empowering the local communities. And it only works if you have local heroes, if you have people deeply committed. And we've seen that, for example, in Nigeria with the Comptroller General of the Nigerian Customs Service, who has made real strides and commitment to long-term investigations. So we work with other NGOs on the policy level and the advocacy level and sharing information and putting out public reports that everybody can use. And then we work with local authorities and also local NGOs also in order to make sure that we're being as effective as we can be to build up that local population and local knowledge.
And the result of all this work in a bunch of cases is real momentum, like real optimism. Elephants, for example, are on the rise for the first time in many decades. They're still a long way off where they were. There might have been as many as 10 million elephants in 2-3 centuries ago in Africa, and today there's probably 400,000. But the trend is good because the trade is dying on account, one end, investigations like the ones that you're carrying out around ivory trafficking, and at the other end, a curtailment of demand because it's becoming less fashionable. So where, in your opinion, considering individual species, is there momentum and cause for optimism?
I think there is a tremendous cause of optimism, certainly on the elephants, on the pangolin. Rhino has been, we've seen a real decline in the seizures. It's starting to go up again, so we're watching that. Sharks are very concerning, but we're hoping that tide is changing. We are now very active in the marine space as well.
Yeah, I remember. Sorry to interrupt you. I remember going to Singapore on a trip related to my work, and I was taken out for some dinner by some very nice Singaporean guys, and of course they said, "Oh, we love our shark fin," and they brought to the table shark fin soup, and I had a bowl of shark fin soup in front of me, and of course I didn't want to be impolite and. My heart was pounding that here I have, this soup in front of me with shark fin in it. And I knew so much about it and I ate it and I tasted it. It doesn't really taste of anything at all, by the way. And it's astonishing to me that it was just so socially acceptable that they had this guy over from England for a business meeting and they thought it was cool to serve shark fin soup. I'm told that that's not the case anymore, that now it's very much a behind closed doors thing and you wouldn't just produce shark fin soup at a dining table in China or in Singapore or what have you.
And that is so important to change the sort of norms so that people are no longer think it's acceptable to serve shark fin soup. And you mentioned the great success with the elephants. And one of the things that really led to that success, it was the enforcement side, it was the WildAid's demand reduction campaigns with the celebrities to help to change that. But it was also, and all of these things might have led to this, the decision by the Chinese authorities to do the ivory ban, it coming into effect in December 2017. The criminals suddenly saw the Chinese authorities really cracking down on it, and they just didn't want to do it anymore. It was too risky. So personally, I'd love to see something similar for the sharks, so that there's no longer an allowance to allow sharks to be trafficked for their fins. I think we need to get to that point. And as I mentioned, the Chinese authorities came out with this new ruling on the pangolin in the traditional Chinese medicine, which is great progress. And that's what we need. There's such a powerful influence. If we can get them to really crack down on this, you can see the impact. And they've been very, very effective in dealing with the transnational organized criminal groups that are dealing in protected species when they when they go after these individuals, they spend years fully investigating the networks, giving really serious sentences, seizing the assets, which is absolutely critical. We have to make this crime type too risky and lower the reward. We need to seize all those assets that they gather from their criminal enterprise. And we've seen that with the Chinese authorities and also with some others, but it's something personally I'm very committed to.
Turning our attention to rhinos, what do you think about this idea of using cell cultures, in effect, to create something that is biologically identical to rhino horn? Now, we know that rhino horn has no medicinal or but value. It's the same as fingernails. I think it's called keratin. So it's nothing special, but there's culturally something special. How do you feel about the idea of manufacturing in bulk a kind of rhino horn substitute using cell culture? Because that's one of the ideas I've read about, that you could just flood the market with fake rhino horns and everyone would be delighted. My worry with that, of course, is that then it normalizes the use of the stuff, and then those who are rich enough will buy the real stuff.
I think you're absolutely right to be concerned about that. And we have seen a huge role of the black market in rhino horn trafficking, and the distinction between what's been seized and what's been poached. So in the end, those that really believe that rhino horn can do something for their health or for other issues, they'll want the real thing. So it'll maintain the demand, maintain the acceptability, and increase the pressure on the rhinos, because people will want the original.
Of course, and of course, it's just an extension of the original argument around farming rhinos for their horns. Again, flooding the market with farmed rhino horns being supposedly a way of curtailing demand for illegally poached rhino horn. But it just worries me that you normalize use of this product, and then the richest people will have the wild stuff. We've seen that with caviar, for example. And I love the African Park story, where the 2,000 rhinos from that one large rhino horn that had to give up because it didn't look like the market was going to open legitimately anytime soon. And now African Park are sprinkling those rhinos in rewilding efforts all around the continent of Africa, from Malawi to Mozambique. And that is a hugely exciting story, the largest rewilding of rhinos ever done. Olivia, what about the pet trade? We read a lot about cheetahs kept in captivity in palaces in GCC countries, for example, in the Gulf. We hear about slow lorises, those funny little primates that people love to have as pets. And of course, parrots and fish. And how big a deal is the pet trade in this problem of wildlife trafficking as compared with Asian medicine and food?
The trafficking of animals for the live pet trade is a huge part of the illegal wildlife trade. And it's an underappreciated part of it. So that makes it almost even worse. There are millions of species that are being decimated so that people can have individual specimens in their homes or in their cars as they go down the strip. We've seen thousands of radiated tortoises and turtles and spider tortoises and lemurs, for example, that are being trafficked, and orangutans, and we're at risk of losing them. It's worth a ton of money. And the risk has been pretty low because people didn't really see it as wildlife crime in the same way that when they see a slaughtered rhino, it really affects them. And people kind of say, well, what's so bad about it? At least they're not killing them. They're ending up in somebody's home or in their car. But when you think about it, an orangutan, for example, there's huge demand for baby orangutans. They have to kill, on average, 2 adults for every baby that's being trafficked. Many die in transit. And then the demand for them is so high that they get bought almost immediately once they reach the transport location. And as a result, we're losing our orangutans. So it's a huge problem, and one that hasn't been appreciated to the extent that it needs to be.
Olivia, how did you come to be running the Wildlife Justice Commission? What's your story?
A sordid tale. So I am a lawyer, and I worked at all the international courts and tribunals in The Hague. So I'm very idealistic. Started working at the Yugoslavia Tribunal right when it got founded, and worked at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs doing international criminal law, laws of war and genocide, and then to the International Criminal Court, and always thinking about protecting those that needed protection. So if in wartime, whether it's children in armed conflict or it's, vulnerable populations. And for me, it was really, really clear we have an obligation as an international community to stop these crimes. And at a certain point, I was getting a little frustrated with international criminal law and accountability. This was several years ago, and you had Assad committing crimes against his own population, and the international community just wasn't really stepping up, in my opinion. And I thought, all right, I want to do something else where I can really see my impact. And I want to work on a problem that I think we can solve in my lifetime. Because genocide, crimes against humanity, those are critically important issues to work on. But the drivers are so big, and right? It's about power, it's about land, it's about money, it's about feeling of community. And I wasn't sure I would be able to solve that in my lifetime. Whereas wildlife crime, this is not that hard. I mean, of course, you'll always have a certain level of crime, but driving species to extinction for profit, that we can solve. And so for me, it made perfect sense. Some of my friends were like, whoa, what are you doing? But I was like, it makes perfect sense. We're protecting those that can't protect themselves. And whether that's children in armed conflict or it's species that are being decimated simply because somebody's making a lot of money from it. Well, that seemed to me like something that I wanted to focus my time and energy and to really make an impact and allow it so that our families in the future and families all over the world can still benefit from nature.
Yeah, it's a moral outrage this is happening at all, and it does seem like an easier problem to fix, especially if governments get serious about tracking these criminals and prosecuting them and giving them proper sentences and treating it like the kind of massive crime that it is. With your former experience at the International Criminal Court, do you think it's possible that we'll see the world agree around the concept of ecocide alongside other crimes against humanity and so on, war crimes? Do you think it's possible that we can imagine these kingpins or political leaders that enable or participate in the massive destruction of nature being brought to The Hague and tried in an international court?
I think there is such a groundswell moving towards the acceptance of ecocide in a way that I wouldn't have anticipated 5 years ago. And I think that the ecocide groups have done a tremendous job in bringing this to the attention, on the one hand, of national authorities, so ensuring that national parliaments are considering putting this into their own legislation, which is in the end what you need. The International Criminal Court is there to fill any gaps and to ensure accountability on a national scale. But you need governments nationally to be institutionalizing this. In addition, you have what they did so cleverly, I think, was to create a model for how you would incorporate this into the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And I really think that we're able to see now a real movement towards acceptance. So we're seeing an acceptance of the concept of ecocide in a way that I wouldn't have anticipated several years ago. They've just done a tremendous job in raising this issue, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is acceptable. And the original idea behind the Wildlife Justice Commission was to include wildlife crime in the statute of the ICC. But this was 10 years ago now. And we said, all right, but in the meantime, we need something else because we're going to lose the rhinos and the elephants and the sharks if we don't do something. So to have a form of international accountability that governments oblige themselves to and are willing to enforce would be a tremendous benefit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I first came across the idea of ecocide when my brother Zach took me to a talk by the late Polly Higgins, who set up the Stop Ecocide International movement. Polly died in 2019 and was quite a visionary. And if it makes so much sense to me that ecocide should be there ranked among the highest crimes that can be committed. And wildlife crime, I think, sits high among those. The driving of a species to extinction for some soup, or for a pet is just absolutely mad and totally unacceptable. And I'm so in awe of your work, Olivia, and that of your team. What can people do? What can someone listening to this podcast do? What can ordinary people do about this problem of wildlife trafficking?
Well, I think there are two things that people can do. One is to let your elected officials know that this is an issue that you care about. So I know in the UK, for example, there's been some talk about, where wildlife crime sits and the enforcement, and there isn't always as much enforcement activity as we need to have. So it's recognizing that this is a global issue and make sure that your elected officials know that you care about this issue and you would like your enforcement authorities and other authorities to be devoting the resources that they need to address this issue. And the second is, we are a small nonprofit with a worldwide impact. So to the extent there is an opportunity and a willingness to support the organization, either from a policy perspective or from a financial perspective, that is always very, very, very much appreciated because we are supported by philanthropy. And it's essential for us to be able to go where the criminals go and to stop them before they drive our species to extinction. We need that kind of support.
Well, I will continue to wave a flag and spread the word for the Wildlife Justice Commission. And when you consider this little organization standing up against this enormous industry and having real wins, one after the next, which we read about in ordinary newspapers. I read in a mainstream newspaper about this bust of the Nigerian pangolin trafficking kingpin. Now, with such a small team and such a small budget, as compared with the tens of billions of dollars that's spent, for example, trying to curtail the drug trade, it is just remarkable. And I'm such a fan. Thank you, Olivia, for everything you do and for the risks that you take. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to speak to me today.
Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate it.
What a pleasure it was to talk to Olivia Swaak-Goldman of Wildlife Justice Commission. Olivia and her team are doing such brave and vital work that should be done by government agencies in tracking down and exposing and breaking apart the gangs that are driving wildlife to extinction through the wildlife trade. I'd be really grateful if you'd share this episode with friends or colleagues who you think might be interested. Give us a like or a review on whatever platform you use to get your podcast, and check out our YouTube channel, Rewilding the World, where some of the best bits get uploaded here and there. Next up, I'm going to be talking to my friend Enrique Sala, the founder and leader of National Geographic's amazing Pristine Seas initiative. Enrique and his team have spearheaded the creation of so far 29 marine protected areas around the world, safeguarding over 6.5 million square kilometers of ocean. That's an area the size of the Amazon from industrial fishing. Enrique really is one of the great heroes of rewilding. And of course, Enrique's behind the film Ocean, David Attenborough's masterpiece, which is out in cinemas now. I hope you'll join us.
You already know that this isn't about one species. It's about systems, interdependence, collapse. And yet, wild salmon, one of the clearest indicators we have, are vanishing fast. Their decline signals something deeper, something more dangerous. I'm Jim Murray. I host The Last Salmon. It's not a side story. It's the biodiversity story that everyone like you should be listening to. Season 2's out now.
One of the best ways to support rewilding is to go and visit rewilding projects on the ground. My friends at the European Nature Trust have asked me to tell you about a series of coexistence adventures that they've put together. They're designed to give you the best chance of seeing Europe's most iconic species, bears, wolves, lynx, and so on. All of these are on the rise in Europe because of rewilding projects. These trips are hosted by expert guides and conservationists, and most importantly, the European Nature Trust is giving half of the revenues directly to the foundations working on the ground to restore wildlife. I'd love you to check out these coexistence adventures at the European Nature Trust website.